All right, well, everyone's just filtering in. I'm going to do some quick housekeeping. So, this event is being recorded. Your cameras are off and will remain off for the event. There will be an opportunity to ask questions for around 15 minutes at the end, and we encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A section, and you can put them in right now if you want. We'll answer them roughly on a first come, first served basis. So, firstly, I'd like to take a moment for land acknowledgement. We recognize that many of us are joining from different places in Canada today, and we will not be able to acknowledge all the Indigenous lands our participants are living on. That being said, I would like to acknowledge that CCLA's office and the speakers for this event are in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the land that Indigenous people have lived on and taken care of since time immemorial. So welcome again, everyone. We're happy to have you here for our last webinar of 2024. And we're excited to be featuring the work of the Canadian Civil Liberties Education Trust for the first time. And we're really excited to have with us the CCLA team of Nat Paul, Erica Petkov, and Megumi Harker. So I would like to pass over to Nat Paul, the Director of our Education Program, for an introduction. Nat, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks very much, and thanks to both you and Rosemary, who's sitting in the background, for organizing this. And thanks in particular to everybody who's taken time out of their day to come and join us. I'm really happy to have a chance to sort of speak to some of you directly. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen here, and this is for me, like, I don't know however many times I do this, it's always still a gamble. Like there's always a possibility I'm going to do something wrong when I try and do like a simple thing like share a screen. So wish me luck. All right, so this is the one we're looking for. All right, so oopsie. See, already something's going wrong. All right, we'll just start back up here. Hang on. All right. So we've called our session here CCLA and CCLET, bringing rights education into classrooms and communities. And so for those of you who have more familiarity with CCLA as an organization, or have been following along with some of these webinars, it's sort of worth laying out some of the structures here, because the CCLA and the CCLET are distinct organizations, but we share a lot of the same resources and obviously share space. So we're sister organizations. CCLA's work is organized into 5 pillars. So they deal with fundamental freedoms, criminal justice, privacy, equality, and then the 5th pillar is education. And so that's what we are here to do. And there are some differences. So whereas people, again, who've sort of followed CCLA's legal work know them as an organization that does, lots and lots of litigation and lots of advocacy work, our work with the CCLET is different, and it focuses on sort of public engagement and rights education. So this is who we are. I'm Nat Paul, and I'm the director of the Canadian Civil Liberties Education Trust, which also makes me the director of education for CCLA, which is strange. And I'm joined here today by Megumi Harker, who is our teacher manager in rights-based education, and by Dr. Erica Petkov, who is our national education program manager. And so what I'm going to talk about is most of the work that we do in schools, and then Megumi and Erica have a couple of different things to speak about. I want to sort of, though, focus on one of the sort of common threads here, which is the idea of civic engagement and access to justice. So within the sort of justice education or public legal education milieu, there is this sort of way of talking about something called access to justice, which is something that a lot of people outside of the sort of legal world haven't really had a chance to talk about. And so this is really about the extent to which people feel as though they are comfortable making use of and understanding the justice system. And this is important because it's actually like a really fundamentally important part of democracy. And so by understanding how rights work, we make the court system and legal processes more accessible and easier to participate in and understand. So in all of our programming, we're kind of trying to think of critical thinking as being part of informed, healthy citizenship. And so anybody who has spent any time whatsoever, on any kind of social media site, knows how algorithms and echo chambers and bad information and a culture of incivility can lead to conversations which end up actually eroding civic space. We want to help people understand current events. We want to actually build skills to allow people to disagree with one another in ways that are productive. We want the justice system to become less opaque and less mysterious. We want people to build a level of comfort in questioning authority, because so often we think of the law as something which is handed down from on high, when in fact, as per the next point, law is imperfect. Law is fluctuating. Law is a participatory sport. So law is going on and changing all the time. And all you have to do is look at the conversations that have been happening around Ottawa over the last couple of days to think about, what kinds of changes in the law we might be looking at in the next little while. This also means understanding the relationship between how courts work and how legislation works, and how these things present checks on one another. This becomes a political question as well, because the nature of these things often is political. And we hope to give a little bit of information about civil society organizations like CCLA and how they work within that space. So this is sort of an overview of all of our programming. We do curriculum development, and we do public education workshops. And we do a little bit of sort of other work within that. But this is most of what we do. So in terms of our presentation work or our workshops, you can see that in 2024, we've done about 8,500 participants have taken part in our stuff. That's a little over 300 workshops in about 150 schools and organizations. Far and away, most of this happens in high schools, and this happens in high schools in Ontario, but also elsewhere in Canada. So that's about 60% of what we're doing. In Ontario, we're very, very lucky. So some people may not know that we actually have 4 law courses on the Ontario curriculum. So those are obvious places that we go into. But there's also a compulsory civics course that kids take in grade 10. And there's opportunities to present in lots of other classes, like English classes or media studies classes, or classes that have a focus on, social justice or social science or anything along those lines. Beyond that, when we have experts who are on the CCLA advocacy staff go and speak in community settings, we call those CCLA talks. We do a certain amount of work with teacher candidates, so people who are studying to become teachers and will eventually go off and do teaching. And we help to build relationships with those folks so that we can support them through the course of their career. And then sort of evenly distributed between newcomer programming and elementary students as well. So these are some of the spaces in which we work. Most of what I'm going to be talking about is school-based programming. So we say, what you might very well ask, does this actually look like in schools? And so, a really important question that we begin with, just to start to orient the conversation, is to ask people whether they've heard of CCLA or the CCLET before. And like for me, I feel lucky if I get into a classroom where I get like 1 or 2 hands that go up. And then sometimes if I'm feeling particularly feisty, I'll ask if anybody's ever heard of the ACLU, or the American Civil Liberties Union. And if I get people who have heard of them, and they haven't heard of the CCLA, well, it sort of, it breaks my little maple syrup sucking Canadian heart. But we can have a joke and start to talk about some of the differences between the organizations. So we do talk a little bit about who we are. So I want people to know that we've been around for a while. I want people to know that we're a not-for-profit organization, because I think a lot of the time that's not clear. And I actually want young people to know that there are places that you can work and do really important work for your community without it being something where it has a goal of making money. It's important to point out that we're not part of the government and don't receive government funding, and that's obviously because a lot of what the CCLA does is enter into litigation against the government. So they sue the government, or they're critical of policy, or they try and impact policy in ways which are going to be more protective of the rights that we're guaranteed. And I also would like to point out that we're nonpartisan, and that we're here as an organization whose job is to protect rights and stand up for rights. Famously, whether or not we necessarily agree with the perspectives of the people who are claiming those rights. So that's a sort of an important premise. Now, beyond talking about the sort of who we are, what we're really trying to do is, as I said before, build that kind of civic engagement capacity. And for me, the sort of the notion of access to justice and legal capability kind of go hand in hand. So legal capability is a word that to me hasn't really gotten out of the sphere of the legal folks, but it's very similar to what you might think of as being, financial literacy, but as applied to the legal world. Many people will encounter law and politics and so forth, but don't really know much about it before they get into those situations. So we want people to feel comfort with the law. We want them to feel a sense of ownership with the law and with the justice system. And so we build the capacity of teachers and facilitators to support their audiences. This requires, knowledge and skills and concepts and tools. And so we try and pass those along. And we do this mostly by introducing productive tension. So when we talk about rights and freedoms, we need to understand that rights and freedoms always exist in balance with other rights and freedoms. And part of what the Charter does is to govern and oversee the relationships which are managed in this kind of way. So often we have really, really complicated clashes between rights and freedoms that emerge in the real legal world. And being able to understand those and being able to understand how we can sort of make decisions in those contexts is a really, really important part of the fundamental sort of social contract that we have. So laws and rights are really, really important for citizens and governments as we lay out, what it is in a democracy to choose who is going to make rules and under what circumstances those rules are going to be considered fair, and how we sort of manage all of that. I mean, we take it for granted, but it really is the basis of our democracy is this sort of notion of fairness. And so we're saying that governments obviously can limit rights and freedoms, but the Charter means that they have to do that in a way which is justifiable and in a way which is fair. So then the question becomes, how do you decide whether something's fair? And there's never not a good time to show John C. Reilly doing this face, because it's a perfect face for this question. One of the things that we bring through a lot of our presentations is a series of questions that CCLET developed a long time ago. We call it the Oaks test, and or rather the Acorn test, and it's called an Acorn test because it's a baby version of a real legal test called the Oaks test, which some people might be familiar with, but it's the legal test that goes with Section 1 of the Charter when courts review legislation which is put forward by governments to determine whether or not it violates rights, and if so, whether it does it in a way which is fair. Which is in legal terms, which can be saved, you might say. And so the Oaks test asks more complicated versions of these questions, but it's essentially the same question. So if you have a rule or a limitation, that is at its essence something which limits freedom. And so the idea is, if it's going to limit freedom, it should do it in a way that's fair. And so the first question is, what's the purpose of it? Is there a good reason to make a rule? What problem is it going to solve? So that's the first question. If it's not going to solve a problem, it's probably not fair. If it's not going to work, it's probably not fair. And if it might have consequences that are worse or unforeseen as compared to the original problem, it might not be fair to ask people to do it. So this is a sort of a skeleton that we bring through most of what we do. This is a sort of a fun and very organic example of a situation or a scenario that I might use to do this. I was at a school in my first year doing this job, and a couple of kids came up to me afterwards and said, Nat, the administration at our school is locking all of these bathrooms. Can we launch a charter challenge against them because of this? And I was like, well, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm probably not going to answer that question in a direct way. So I said, why would you want to do that? And so they told me this story about how there's all kinds of vaping and vandalism going on in bathrooms in high schools, which turns out to be the case because we've now verified this in many provinces and in many high school sessions. And so what administration has done in many cases is to shut down the bathrooms. So this is interesting because we can use the ACORN test here. We can say, okay, so there is a problem and administration is responding to it. And the rule is, or their action is, we're going to shut bathrooms down. Is that going to work? And then the kids immediately tell me, no, it's not going to work because people will just vape elsewhere, or they will, or they'll vandalize elsewhere. And then in addition to that, everybody just sort of gets concentrated into these washrooms. And so then you get to hear about the consequences of this, which are, of course, that now everybody is forced into the same bathroom, which is cramped, and privacy is an issue, and the vandalism actually gets worse, and everybody's exposed to the vaping, and people are late for class, and it sort of becomes harder. So it's a good example of a rule that's sort of like right in people's lives. And very much something which is a live subject now. So there's actually all kinds of stuff you can do with this. So I know, for example, of a school I was recently at in Windsor where they've got facial recognition technology, and they're using it to try and figure out who's doing these things in the bathroom. So we use cases and scenarios like this to apply the ACORN test. So, one that that people will be familiar with, a CCLA case that people are probably familiar with, is Bill 21 in Quebec, which of course deals with restrictions on government employees and what religious clothing they can wear while they're at work. And so we look and we ask questions about what the purpose of the legislation is, but in particular, the consequences of legislation like this, and whether whatever its goals were are balanced or matched or outweighed by the consequences of people having to choose between their sort of freedom to have religious freedom of religion and their freedom to express themselves in their religion in a way which is consistent with their faith. So knowing your audience here is a thing in schools. We work with younger kids, so kids from as young as kindergarten and grade 1 all the way up through high school, but also post-secondary. My wife is a kindergarten teacher, and this is one of my favorite texts that she's ever sent me. So people who remember school or who have kids in school will know that in September we have Terry Fox Day in the schools, which is a sort of a fundraising day in honor of Terry Fox and the Marathon of Hope. This is a text my wife sent me to remind me that her kids take things literally because some of them are 3, and she has to clarify that Terry Fox is actually a human and not a fox, not Terry the Fox. It's Terry Fox. But when you tell 3-year-olds something Terry Fox, we're going to run, they're like, cool, foxes run, so Terry must be a fox. So with younger kids, you can't do obviously the complicated legal tests. So it's really a question of what you want to be working on and what you want and what's a realistic sort of learning goal for that audience. And so we talk about rules. We talk about the importance of rules and just sort of even recognizing some rules in your life. So what are the rules in your life, and who can make them? And we do this because we want to sort of get people thinking about who has authority and who is supposed to yield to authority, and what the terms are under which we can do that in a way that's fair. So we can ask, are rules fair? We can ask what the purpose of rules are, and we can ask what we can do if we think rules aren't fair. And there's a variety of sort of methods that we might use to do this. So a couple of different things that we've used before. We have a lovely story called.
I've got a surprise for you, Sniffles, my boy.
See.
Ta-da!
Cool.
Now we can watch the stars, the glory of the universe.
What are stars?
Hello, citizens. Mayor Mo here. Recently, City Council identified a problem. Due to light pollution, we in the city can't see the stars. So, we voted to turn off all the lights in the city at night.
Hey, that's dangerous.
Why did the councilors vote in the no lights after dark regulation? Was it for a good reason? Did it work? Didn't everyone enjoy the night sky?
Hey, that's not fair.
What else happened? And that's the news from the city. Don't assume that just because a rule works, it's fair. Hey, whoa, this isn't even a flattering picture. I have some questions to ask about freedom of the press.
Yeah, so if you're watching, you might have picked up that the questions that are asked there are the same questions that come up in the context of the Acorn test. And so this is a series of 6 or 7 short videos that are sort of focused on this fictional town where there's a mayor who may make silly rules, or there's a store owner who may make a silly rule, but it's always the same kind of breakdown of these questions. Another resource that we've used with younger kids to great success is this story, Click Clack Moo, Cows That Type. And so this is a story which I've actually found out was written by a lawyer, so I'm kind of not surprised to learn that. But it's a story about a sort of a revolution on a farm, about cows who have a demand. They're cold at night and they want electric blankets. And the sort of conceit of the story is that somehow the cows have a typewriter, and they use the typewriter to launch a campaign asking for change. And so, eventually, the cows communicate with the farmer in writing, and when he doesn't yield to what is perhaps a very reasonable demand, they go on strike and they bring the chickens into it, and they have a negotiated settlement. And so, it's a really wonderful opportunity to sort of talk about the importance of sort of freedom of assembly, like the idea of a collective voice, the idea of freedom of expression, and the idea of being able to stand up for things that are important to you. So those work really well, and we get good participation from younger kids when we do these things. Oops, we're gonna go ahead. Older kids get really different kinds of things. So whereas I'm sure there's lots of high school kids who would love to watch cartoons with us, we get into more complicated kinds of legal questions. So sometimes we might have a really specific focus. So it could be the charter and criminal justice, or the charter and social justice. Obviously, the notwithstanding clause is an important thing which is emerging these days. We could talk about current CCLA cases or rights when dealing with the police, but through this, we're generally looking at cases that illustrate a point, or highlight a really important right, or explain how a legal test works, because those legal tests are also ways of managing complicated disputes. Like many people don't know, but most or many sort of sections of the charter have actually an analytical framework which is used, and that's a great way of asking important questions. We're always sort of focused on emerging issues in law and society. So, privacy and data protection is huge. How governments and how laws impact civil society, and whether or not what the relationship is between law and social change. So does society change and then laws change, or does changing the law cause society to move? These are really important questions. So for example, we talk sometimes about medical assistance in dying, and how it is that our courts moved from a sort of a position of sort of denying that as a right in the Rodriguez case in 1992 to how much, how differently that was decided in the Carter case in 2015. And so we'll move them into small groups, and we might end up, excuse me, we might end up discussing a whole variety of different things. So it might be something like, how do we understand a law that said it was, that we actually had a Safe Streets Act, which said that it was illegal to do something called aggressive panhandling. And quite recently, a judge found that that law violated the presumption of innocence as well as the right to free expression. We might look at things that have to do with bail crises. So in Ontario, in 2023, about 80% of the people who were incarcerated were awaiting bail or awaiting their trials. They hadn't actually been convicted of anything, which sort of in itself runs contrary to the presumption of innocence. We might talk about what kind of information we're giving away when we use digital apps and things like that. We might talk about things like whether or not a blanket search of a school was constitutional and whether or not it was constitutional to use sniffing dogs. And this gives us an opportunity to talk about what are the sort of important things that police have to do in order to search something, what needs to go into a warrant. But it could also be something, as sobering as a case like AC versus Manitoba, which many people know this case, but it involved a girl who, for religious purposes, didn't want to consent to a blood transfusion, and her parents agreed with her. And the law said that had she been 16, she could have made that decision. But because she was not that age, there was a conflict between what the hospital and the governments wanted to do and what her family wanted to do. So these are the kinds of things we do. We really enjoy it. But this, as I said, this has been mostly just sort of about what we do when we're in a school setting. And so we're elsewhere. And so with that, I'm actually just going to sort of turn it over and leave it with my colleague Megumi to speak a little bit more about our newcomer programming. So Megumi, why don't you take it away?
Great. Thank you so much, Nat. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megumi, and I'm excited to talk to you about our newcomer program. But first, I thought we could start off by looking at this slide, which is one that I use in classrooms to get students warmed up. So we're looking at Winnie the Pooh and Tigger on one side, and next to it, we've got a picture of former US President Obama walking with President Xi of China. So this picture became a popular meme in China. It went viral at the time. But here, and I asked students, what would you think if I told you that this picture is now banned on social media in China? So if you were to go to Chinese WhatsApp, Chinese Instagram, or any other platform, you wouldn't find this picture. And if you tried to post it, you'd get an error message. So a government is banning images of a storybook character. What's the big deal? And then, as you can guess, we go a bit deeper. Okay, what about when the government censors the news people see or the history that people learn? What are some things that might happen if the government controlled everything that people see and hear? And how do you think freedom of expression could be important? So this is our introduction, to start thinking about the charter and why it's important. But let's shift gears now to look at our newcomer program, and I'm excited to talk to you about this. So through this program, we engage newcomers to, just as we do in schools, to know and think critically about their charter rights. So our goal is to engage newcomers where they are, to know their rights, to think critically about their rights, and to own their rights. And when we talk about ownership of rights, it's about taking these ideas about charter rights from abstract concepts to meaningful ideas that we can relate to emotionally. Because human rights education research shows that when people feel ownership of their rights and when they feel emotionally connected to their rights, that's when they are more likely to increase their civic involvement. And this means stronger and more vibrant communities for everyone. So one of our main goals for 2024 was to continue to grow this program nationally. So this past year, the team traveled to Edmonton, Halifax, and Montreal. Now, these are short trips, but they're still really valuable opportunities for us to not only give workshops, but to build and strengthen relationships with local settlement organizations and law schools. So this year we worked with 27 settlement organizations to deliver 44 workshops across 4 provinces. And you can see on the graph, we delivered the highest number of workshops in Ontario, followed by Nova Scotia, Quebec, and Alberta. On the right side of the slide, we tried to convey to you a bit of the rich diversity of organizations that we get to work with to deliver these programs. So each of these logos here represents a hard-won and valued relationship. It's actually been a bit of a hard slog to make initial connections with settlement groups. We've basically been cold calling newcomer organizations to let them know about our new charter rights workshops. They don't know who we are. So we're so glad to be able to work with these amazing groups. We engaged 848 newcomers in 2024. So again, CCLET reached over 8,500 students, teacher candidates, and newcomers this year. So our newcomer outreach is still a small part of our overall education program and still very much in the process of getting established. So if you look at the middle section here, you can see the newness reflected in the line graph, which shows the growth of our reach to newcomers since 2023. So the goal for next year is to continue this upward trend. But let's look at the chart on the right. It shows feedback from a group of newcomers after a session responding to the presentation's language level. So in other words, how accessible is the information we present to our audience of newcomers who are second language learners? So you can see the majority of participants found the language level to be appropriate, but just under half found the language level to be a little simple, a little difficult, or too simple or too difficult. And I think this graph is a good representation of the diversity of language ability that we often come across delivering these workshops. So how do we address this language gap? It's a challenge because we need to convey complex information about the charter to people with beginning language skills in English or French. Well, actually, okay, so first of all, newcomers are not all a monolith, and language is not necessarily a barrier for all participants. To give you an idea of the diversity of language levels, we've presented to people arrived here from Afghanistan 3 months earlier with very basic language skills. And then the next week stood up in front of a group of MBA students from India with obviously extremely comprehensive language skills. But most of our participants fall somewhere in between on a language ability continuum. So how do we meet this challenge? We borrow from the classroom. So we adapt techniques from an educational approach called sheltered instruction. So for example, look at the picture on the left, which is a slide from our newcomer presentation that comes at the latter half of the session where we're reviewing material that's already been broken down and presented on the 4 fundamental freedoms. So if you look at the question in the middle, a commentator criticizes the government on TV. Which fundamental freedom is this an example of? So you can see that the question is provided in writing along with a visual aid, the picture there in the middle. And then additional context that might help to answer the question is provided along the top of the slide, again, with both words and pictures. So after we review for understanding here, we move on to discuss case studies, like some of the ones that Nat illustrated earlier. And we also ask discussion questions about participants' experiences with rights in their home countries. And people can choose to share or not, but often people will share what can be dramatic experiences from their home country. And in this way, people connect to their prior knowledge, and that's an important part of the process of coming to own your rights. So let's talk about feedback. We send out surveys to the teachers and program coordinators who host our workshops. This year, we received feedback from 19 respondents, which is roughly half. We've got to work on that. But you can see some key takeaways here. Generally, respondents reported that participants were very engaged with the workshop, that content was very relevant, and 100% said that they would participate in another CCLET workshop. Along the bottom, we have some qualitative feedback, which basically reflects a lot of the numbers that we're seeing from the survey. Next year, we'll begin to capture more systematically feedback from newcomers through an online survey. So what's next? Well, we plan to continue to solidify and increase our geographic growth. So in addition to our team traveling from Toronto to outside the province, Edmonton and Montreal, we've been piloting a program of recruiting and training law students living in those areas to present workshops to newcomers with the goal of moving towards a locally self-sustaining model. And then we'll also continue to deepen our relationships with settlement organizations. Their support is so important to maintaining and growing our presence in new areas. So we want to address both the demand and supply side of this geographic growth sort of equation. And then we're also going to work on diversifying our workshop materials, including we have an exciting new video series and toolkit that Erica will talk about in just a minute. So lastly, just a little bit more detail about our 2 pilot projects. So first, recruiting and training law students. Nat has been very busy working closely with the faculties of law at the University of Alberta and McGill University to recruit and train interested law students. So we have Gwyneth, Richard, and Laura. They've delivered 5 workshops this past fall in Montreal and Edmonton, and we hope to continue this successful pilot and expand it next year in Ontario and possibly Manitoba. We're also launching a new pilot project to partner with law school-based legal clinics to offer joint newcomer workshops. Newcomers have expressed interest in learning about practical topics such as tenant rights, laws around immigration status, and so on. So partnering with a legal clinic will enable us to provide a wider range of workshops to even better meet the needs of participants. So that is the CCLET newcomer program in a nutshell. I'm the one talking about it today, but like everything we do in education, it's very much a team effort. So thank you very much for listening, and I will pass to Erica. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nat and Megumi. Let me share my screen here. Okay. All right, let's see. Is that working for folks? Hope so. So yeah, so Nat and Megumi talked about our programming in classrooms and in communities. And I want to talk more specifically about a brand new resource that we've been working on for the past year. And it's a video series called The Charter is for Everybody, A Guide to Understanding Your Rights. It's a series of 5 videos, each are about 4 to 5 minutes long, about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It's geared primarily, but not exclusively, for newcomers to Canada and can be used in workshops with newcomers. And it's called The Charter is for Everybody because in our experience, newcomers often don't realize that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms applies to them too, that it applies to them even if they're not citizens yet. So that's sort of the inspiration behind the title. And the idea here with this project is that newcomer organization staff, librarians that work with newcomers, because we've sort of found that often public libraries are the sites where a lot of work is done with newcomers, librarians, staff, any of them, others in the community can run workshops themselves about rights and freedoms without needing the 3 of us physically present. So this will really allow us to expand our geographic reach significantly. And the video series is different from other educational material that's out there in the sense that it's not too technical. The focus is on people talking in their own words about why particular sections of the Charter are important and relevant in people's day-to-day lives. We also highlight a few interesting cases in some of the videos to show the real-world applicability of some of the Charter sections. We also decided to feature the statues in the McMurtry Gardens of Justice in downtown Toronto beside the courthouse on University Avenue as a sort of artistic through line throughout the videos. So for example, in the video about fundamental freedoms, you'll see the statue about freedom of religion featured, or in the video about equality rights, you'll see the statue equal before the law featured. So they're really interesting artistic features that are open to interpretation. So by featuring them, we open up opportunities for workshop participants to really offer their own interpretations as well. And in terms of substance, we decided to focus on Section 2 of the Charter, Fundamental Freedoms, Section 7, Life, Liberty, and Security of the Person, Sections 8, 9, and 11, so some privacy and some legal rights, and Section 15, Equality Rights. And our speakers are experts from our team and our National Council. Some are still in the team, some have moved on to different opportunities. And there was no formal script or teleprompter. People are sometimes surprised to realize that. We interviewed each speaker informally for about 45 minutes each, in order to put together about 4 to 5 minutes of footage for each video. And we really wanted this more informal, casual style to be more engaging. So next, we call this slide informally the many faces of Shakir. Shakir is our director of the criminal justice program at the CCLA. And I just show this just to show you that we actually have translations available. So far we have subtitles available not only in English, obviously, but in French, Spanish, Ukrainian, Tagalog, and Arabic to start. We are hoping to add more languages as we go. So we're looking at next year probably adding perhaps Mandarin and Punjabi. We look at sort of Immigration Canada and Statistics Canada data on which languages are most frequently spoken by newcomers to kind of cater to that. So I would love to show you just a quick segment. Now, in the interest of time, I'm just going to show you just about 1.5 minutes from one of the videos about fundamental freedoms, just so you can get a sense. So let me scroll that forward. Okay, there we go.
Section 2 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms protects fundamental freedoms, as the Charter calls them. Those are the rights that protect democracy and protects people's ability to participate in democracy and to stand up for their own rights and to stand up for other people's rights. So it's freedom of thought and conscience and belief, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, so that journalists can investigate and inform the public about things that are happening they might not know about. It includes the right to peaceful assembly. That means that you can protest and disagree and criticize the government and come together with other people. Freedom of association gives you the right to connect with and meet with and join in groups with other people who have a similar purpose or a similar goal. And that allows people who have less power and less ability to have their voices heard be stronger together. That includes workers who may need to seek better working conditions, safer working conditions from their bosses. On their own, they might feel vulnerable, but together they can seek those things that are important to workers. And it applies in the public for minority groups who may not have the power on their own as individuals to have their voices heard, but together can be powerful and can demand change. Section 2 includes freedom of religion, which is the right to choose your religion, to practice your religion, to pray, to observe religious practices, whether that's wearing religious symbols or expressing your beliefs, and also the right not to be religious and not to have religion forced upon you. All of that is included in freedom of religion, and all of that is protected under Section 2 of the Charter.
Okay, so there you can kind of get a sense of the sort of style of the videos. So we've already sort of soft launched the series. We've been showing it in many of the classrooms that we visit. Megumi had the opportunity to show it to newcomers in Halifax. Gwyneth, our local law student partner, has shown it with French subtitles in Montreal. So here you can see some images. On the left is a high school in Mississauga where I was showing the video series. And then we have some newcomer sessions on the right. So we've already started rolling it out. I just want to quickly mention, because this was very recent, I had the opportunity to show the videos with Tagalog subtitles to actually a group of senior newcomers, Filipino senior newcomers, during a session, and it went really well. They really appreciated having the subtitles in their language. We had great discussions about rights and freedoms in Canada, but also in their native Philippines. We got very positive feedback, as you can see there, about the content being relevant and impactful and practical and engaging. And I think, with those subtitles, there's just also the level of just showing respect to these communities that they really appreciate. So we're hoping to just do more of that going forward. I'll kind of run right through since we're going to be running short on time, but we've also developed a toolkit, so supplemental educational materials to accompany this video series. So we hired Amanda Pike in the bottom left there. She's a teacher and curriculum consultant. She helped us develop content to accompany all of the videos so that librarians, settlement workers, people can lead workshops themselves with newcomers. So each video, for example, has a facilitator guide, which includes an overview of the content. So for people who don't have much knowledge of the charter in advance, that's all right. You know, they can read about what the video is going to cover. There are discussion questions, there's activities, there's information about the statutes in McMurtry Gardens of Justice and opportunities for participants to engage with that. There's all sorts of resources that are available. And she is a high school teacher, and she mentioned that from her perspective, this video series would actually also be really well suited for grade 10 civic students. So this is something that we're exploring and excited about, is potentially repurposing this video series also as a classroom resource, and really getting, you know, as much mileage as we can out of it, and perhaps, you know, complementing curriculum on civics with this series as well. And so right now we're working on developing a concrete strategy to really launch the video nationwide. But in the meantime, if you are very curious, you can scan this QR code. So if you would like to see the video series, it's currently on YouTube unlisted, but you can please feel free to check out the video series. You can scan this QR code. I'll just give it a second if you are interested. And then just moving forward, I just want to quickly wrap up with saying that en français, everything we do that we've talked about today, we can also do in French. I have there some Charter Jeopardy that's very popular with high school students that we can do in French. With our program expansion into Montreal, for example, we've really bumped up our French language presence within schools, with newcomers in Quebec and elsewhere. And finally, I'd just like to mention a contest that we run every year. It's called the Bernard Chernos Contest. It's a high school essay contest in memory of Bernard Chernos, generously funded by the Chernos family. He was a civil libertarian, a lawyer, a gold medalist at U of T, Faculty of Law when he graduated. And so every year we ask questions about, you know, fundamental freedoms issues. They're hypothetical prompts, but they're based on real issues. This year we're asking about lowering the voting age, about protest rights and free speech and hate speech in high schools, and bail reform. And students can either write a short essay or do a short video. And last year we got incredible video entries. And you can win cash prizes. And so if any of the people listening today are high school teachers or no high school teachers, please do spread the word. You can check out our website, cclet.org/contests, for more information. And this is something that we're very happy to run every year. So I will throw it to Nat now to just do a very brief, just look at our website, and then we will take questions. Thanks.
Sorry, yeah, I'm going to go really, really quick because I know we're running short on time. So I'm just going to very quickly show folks the website. And we are, is it this one? All right. So this is CCLET's website. So it's distinct from CCLA's. And if you just have a look really quickly, you can just scroll through it and you can find the information you need about how to book a workshop for any of the sort of levels that we've spoken about. A little bit of commentary, but then down here is where you see the resources that we have. So this is where everything is. And so you might, for example, click on something like this one here, which has to do with privacy, in which case you would come to a page that looked like this and a prompt to get updates. And then you can just download the materials here. So the way many of these work is we have a slide deck, which is something that you can show, but then also sort of a walkthrough for how you would make your moves through that if you were a teacher or a facilitator. And so with that, I think we're probably done with the presenting part of what we're doing. And so if there's questions, this would be a great time for us to take them.
Yeah, so thank you, Nat, Megumi, and Erica. So we're just going to go to questions now. So we did get a lot of questions, so apologies if we can't answer them all. We only have around 10 minutes or so. So we'll try and get through as many as possible. So the first question I can actually answer is the session being recorded and how can I get a copy? So yes, it is being recorded. We will send the copy to everybody via email in a couple of days' time. So you don't have to do anything. If you're registered for the session, we'll send it to you via email. Second question, do you have a curriculum and materials which might be appropriate for public officials, for example, members of parliament? they could use for their education.
So I can take a quick stab at that one, and the short answer to that one is no. And I would hope that the level of engagement that we'd be looking at, I would hope that members of parliament would be a little ahead of where we are some of the time, kind of thing, because they're the ones who are actually engaged with the legislation. So actual politicians, when CCLA engages with politicians, it's probably not CCLET that's doing it. It's probably members of the advocacy team who are looking to actually have input into how legislation is written or how policy is written, but not sort of an overall guide towards things like, you know, the different sections of the charter and how they work, which is sort of more the level that we're aiming for. I hope that answers your question.
Perfect. And next question. Based on your experience delivering seminars in school, do you believe that students are receiving adequate civic instruction? Is the Constitution taught? Are our system of government and the role of Parliament, the judiciary, and civilian rights and rights and responsibilities fully explored?
I can try. So, I mean, honestly, it depends which class we go to. So, you know, if we go to a grade 10 civics class and they're just starting their unit on the charter, it's hard to gauge. When we go to like grade 11 and 12 law classes, they do seem to have a pretty good knowledge. But given that those are elective classes, so all students have to do the grade 10 civics, but not all of them go through to law in later years, I would say my experience is mixed in terms of, you know, are they getting enough instruction? I think they are. I mean, the curriculum, I think, is solid, but I think having a program, and obviously, you know, we can't be everywhere at once, but having a program like ours, having someone come in and represent an organization that does real practical work, like when we tell them, okay, it was our organization that's suing the government of Quebec over Bill 21, or it's our organization that's involved in challenging racial profiling, or what have you. It adds a layer of realness that is compelling to them, as opposed to just what they sort of see in their textbooks every day. But in my opinion, you know, it just sort of speaks to the importance of the work that we do. But civics education is an ongoing challenge. And we all know in this day and age of greater misinformation, and, you know, it's got to be an all hands on deck effort in terms of improving media literacy and greater opportunities for students to engage in politics and at a younger age. So I think it's a mixed bag in Ontario specifically. I think the students are learning, but I think we all need to do more to really improve civic knowledge and media literacy. So that we have more informed citizens.
Excellent. Thank you, Erica. Another question. You covered a couple examples of the Oaks test and the Acorn test. Is there a good place where we can get case studies on our website or on other websites that you would recommend?
One really great resource is called Charterpedia, and so there's a whole list of charter, which is maintained by the government, and so you can look at section 1 and you can look at sort of it will give you a fairly plain language summary of what some of the most important cases are in that respect. But if I'm reading the question correctly, I mean, you know, there's lots of really interesting cases which have engaged with the Oaks test. So one of my favorite cases is my favorite because it actually emerges from traffic court. So there is the name will come to me as I talk about it, but it's a case from the Ontario Court of Appeal, which involved the use of speed limiters in big rig trucks. So the government made a rule that if you were driving a big rig, you had to have a limiter that made it so that you couldn't go above 110, I think, kilometers per hour, kind of thing. And a trucker took the limiter off of his truck so that he could exceed that speed. It's Michaud, R versus Michaud. That's what it is. It's Eugene Michaud is the name of the guy. And so he got a traffic citation for having done this, and he actually challenged this in court, saying that his right to security of the person under Section 7 was threatened by his inability to actually speed up, because he argued that there were situations in which he would actually need to speed up in order to keep himself safe. For example, if another large vehicle that was not so regulated was coming at him from behind. And the Court of Appeal actually found that this was a violation of his rights, but then found that it was a justifiable violation of his rights because, on balance, the legislation had a valid purpose. It would achieve what it was going to do, and that the likelihood of preventing serious accidents was greater given the legislation than without it. And that was a really important one because prior to this, there had been sort of an unwritten understanding that a judgment that violated Section 7 and did so without maintaining the principles of fundamental justice would almost never be saved under Section 1, but in this case it was.
That's interesting. Another question is it harder to work in schools than it was before the pandemic? I've heard the Toronto District School Board has many more restrictions than it used to have, so I'm just wondering if you're still able to get into the same number of schools.
Yeah, I mean, I can take this one, and then there's other things which we might which are different about working in schools lately. So I would say that it's not just the TDSB, but schools in general have taken a more conservative approach to who is coming into their spaces. So the TDSB has one rule in particular, and many school boards also have like an approved vendor list, and so it's important for organizations to be on the approved vendor list. And if you're not on the approved vendor list, then it becomes more difficult to get into schools. But actually, it's province wide. There's been legislation which is requiring. That parents receive notice, with anywhere from 2 to 5 weeks in advance of a presentation which is coming in, and that's so that they can choose whether to opt in or opt out of that presentation on behalf of their child. And so that, I mean, certainly introducing new layers of complication has been something which makes it harder for teachers. Whereas it used to just sort of be easy for teachers to go, okay, let's get so now there's a sort of an added layer, and administration needs to be engaged and so forth. So that's been different, but I don't think we've seen a substantial bite in our numbers. We actually had a very good quarter this way, and this is the quarter in which we've most directly been dealing with that question.
So this is the last question we can take. I'm sorry, we just have 3 minutes left, but I think it's a great question to end on. The question is, we're becoming so polarized and intolerant of dissenting views in our country and communities. Can you explain how education programs like yours might help us get better at disagreeing respectfully with each other?
Erica, go ahead, and if I have anything to add, I'll try and do that.
No, I was just going to offer, I don't know if Megumi, if you want to add. Yeah, I mean, the main thing that we emphasize in our programming is sort of civil discourse and debates. And so I think, and the parts of our sessions where we get the most engagement are during the debates. So we introduce topics that are nuanced, that have gray areas. And I encourage students, okay, what is your gut instinct? Now, what's the counter argument? Let's engage with that. And I tell students, sometimes I'll joke and say, nobody's going to get canceled. Like, this is a space where, Bill 21 in Quebec, the banning religious symbols in the public workspace, the vast majority of students will say they don't like this. And obviously CCLA is suing the government of Quebec. So we don't either, but we talk about what about the separation of church and state? What's the importance of that? But then how do we achieve that in a way that minimally impairs people's rights? So we don't just take a black and white approach to everything. We encourage the students to think critically, to consider other points of view, to not jump to conclusions. It's really like critical thinking is at the core of what we do. And I think the more students, one at a time, that we can really help with their critical thinking skills, the more we'll be able to kind of talk to each other and engage with each other about complex issues, hopefully in a less polarized way. But, it's one person at a time. It's hard work, but it's very meaningful, and we feel very passionately about the importance of it.
Yeah, I mean, the only, I think Erica said that very well. The only thing that I'd add to that is that when kids practice this, that's actually skill building. Like these are actual skills. Like they're things that you have to learn, and they're things that you have to practice. And so, sometimes it's useful to just say, take a ridiculous position on a ridiculous question and develop an argument. And that's what debating is. And that's actually, like part of what I'm hoping to do is to bring people into the world where they see that Lawmaking is done by regular people who are flawed and make mistakes, and so nothing is perfect. And you don't have to be perfect; you just have to make an argument. So, the person who initiated the role that I'm in right now is Danielle McLaughlin, whose name you might have seen on the video that I showed. You know, she's famous for saying, "I don't want any of you to agree with each other." You know, the first thing is you're not allowed to agree with each other as we talk about this. Say something, but make it, you know, make it a position that's silly, defend it, and then it's sort of it's actually practicing. So I think you know, that's a sort of the attitude that we take to it. And you know, as Erica said, one at a time. We win some, we lose some, and that's the nature of the beast. So I guess with that, I'm going to say thanks to everybody who chose to spend some time with us this afternoon. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your support of CCLA and the CCLET as well. Many of us are going to observe religious celebrations and holidays over the next little while. So if that applies to you, we hope you have a wonderful time and a relaxing time with your families and the people who you care about. And with that, I'll let Michael close it.
Perfect. Thank you, Nat. Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Megumi, for an excellent presentation. We're really happy you all came. So thank you all for coming out. Please keep an eye on your email if you want to view this presentation again. It'll come in the next few days. We're going to end it here, but I hope to see you all out in early 2025 when we do our next presentation. So I'll just leave you with that echoing happy holidays for you, all of you that celebrate, and we'll see you in 2025. Thank you.